So, after a very clickbait synopsis they gave us a week ago, the trial reading for the newest volume of Classroom Elite is finally released. While some part is clearly disappointing, at least we finally got the long-awaited monologue of Tsubasa Nanase. Tsubasa already got her own monologue in Volume 3 second year arc, so this new monologue makes her the first character who got two monologues in this series, and both monologues are connected in a very surprising way. However, since the trial reading consists of the prologue and a small part of Chapter 1, let's keep the main dish for a bit, and start with the appetizer, which is a slice-of-life story of Ayanokoji and his new classmates. The first chapter starts with Ayanokoji looking outside the window, realizing that the rain will keep pouring from morning till night. He has a plan to meet up with Shimazaki and Yoshida, because Shimazaki wants to know Ayanokoji's secret to getting a perfect score on the last exam. While it was so disappointing that the most hyped sentence from the synopsis turned out to be just a guy asking for a study method, this first chapter gave us a clear picture of Shimazaki's and Yoshida's character. Shimazaki is the type of student who only thinks about studying. He has a plan to go to the top university and already took part in cram school in his evening time, so we could say he used almost every time he has for studying. He is probably similar to Yukimura, but since he was originally placed in Class A, Shimazaki must have no problem making friends, and doesn't look down on people. Yoshida is quite the opposite. Even as a former Class A member, he didn't prioritize his studies and chose to focus on enjoying his remaining time as a high schooler, especially when it comes to love. As a reminder, Yoshida has a crush on Shiraishi, but he keeps denying it even though everyone else knows about it. It seems like Yoshida is quite serious about his feelings, so we better expect a confession in the near future. Speaking of Yoshida, Sakayanagi told Ayanokoji something interesting about Yoshida back in Volume 11 first year arc. Since Sakayanagi has some connection with Shiraishi, and Yoshida has had a crush on Shiraishi for who knows how long, maybe this surprising connection will turn out to be something interesting. Shiraishi probably had been close with Sakayanagi since the first year, but let's just wait and let Kinugasa cook. The most interesting part from the first chapter is the fact that Shimazaki brings Ayanokoji to the bookstore. Once again, he shows us why he was placed in Class A, because if Ayanokoji were hanging out with his friends from his former class, the bookstore would be the last place they would choose. I think this is the first time we actually saw Ayanokoji going to the bookstore, and if we are speaking about books, this setup will be a perfect place to bring Hiyori to the first chapter. Since Hiyori already appears into colored illustrations, she will probably have a lot of scenes in this volume. And since the trial reading ended with Yoshida talking about love, maybe it will lead to a spicy interaction between Ayanokoji and Hiyori, which will eventually lead to the illustration where Hiyori is holding a flower. But once again, let's just wait and see how their interaction will go. Despite the disappointing bait from the synopsis, Tsubasa Nanase monologue is an actual banger full of lore drops. This monologue is a continuation from her monologue in Volume 3 second year arc, where Tsubasa found Eiichiro hanging himself. She managed to help him, and with the help of Tsukishiro, Eiichiro could receive treatment in a hospital, even though he is currently in a vegetative state. This monologue confirms that Matsuo Eiichiro is an actual real person, and not just a made-up story by Tsubasa to get close to Ayanokoji. This revelation is groundbreaking, because every theory about Tsubasa being a student from the Kijima facility, or theory about Ayanokoji being intentionally sent to ANHS by Atsuomi now needs to be questioned. First, let's arrange everything we know about Matsuo. The first time Matsuo was mentioned was in Volume 7 first year arc during Atsuomi's conversation with Ayanokoji. From Atsuomi, we learned that Matsuo was Ayanokoji's caretaker before he enrolled at ANHS. Because Matsuo helped Ayanokoji to enroll at ANHS, Atsuomi decided to ruin his life to the point that Matsuo ended up taking his own life. According to Atsuomi and Ayanokoji, the Butler Matsuo had a son, which is Matsuo Eiichiro. He was a brilliant student who went to a respectable school, but because of Atsuomi's influence, he was expelled from his school and cannot apply to another. It's only because the Butler Matsuo ended his own life that Atsuomi stopped interfering with Eiichiro's life, and now Eiichiro works some kind of part-time job without any guarantee of the future. This story of Matsuo Eiichiro is later brought up again in the Volume 3 second year arc, where Tsubasa said she was a childhood friend of Eiichiro. and she wanted to take revenge on Atsuomi because Ichiro ended up taking his own life, just like his father. From these two volumes, we need to filter which one is a truth and which one is a lie, because this same story was mentioned by two different people who were supposed to be on different sides. First, when Atsuomi said he was punishing the Butler Matsuo and his son, that was definitely a lie, because later in Volume 0, we learned that Ayanokoji's enrollment in ANHS was already planned by Atsuomi, so punishing Matsuo doesn't make any sense. Even before Volume 0, it feels strange that Atsuomi hired a butler that has the potential to disobey him, because from what we know about Atsuomi, he is a very cautious man. And now let's take a look at Tsubasa's story. So far what she said in Volume 3 was aligned with what Atsuomi said, where Ichiro tried to end his own life after his life was ruined by Atsuomi. However, her monologue in the trial reading confirms that Ichiro doesn't die, so Tsubasa's story about being possessed or carrying his will is just an exaggeration, but the rest of the story fits perfectly with what Atsuomi said in Volume 7. However, there are a few things that are simply strange even if they match up. First of all, how could Tsukishiro have found out about Ichiro? According to Tsukishiro, he already knew them ever since they were little, but that doesn't explain how he could know about Ichiro's situation in a real time. If we try to imagine the scenario from that day, Tsubasa's first action after she saved Ichiro must be to call an ambulance. However, Tsubasa mentioned that they were ejected by several hospitals, which clearly doesn't make any sense. Tsubasa mentioned that Ichiro could have lost his life if they were 30 minutes late, so Ichiro's condition is definitely a medical emergency, and a hospital is obligated to stabilize any patient even if they have no insurance or money to pay. And yet, Tsubasa was turned away by not just one, but several hospitals until Tsukishiro found a room for Ichiro. It might be just a coincidence, but we know who Tsukishiro is. The fact that he could find Ichiro at the exact time and even already prepared Tsubasa's admission to ANHS is hard to believe as a coincidence. Not to mention that the fact Tsukishiro was somehow linked with Ichiro, who is the son of Atsuomi Butler, is already strange to begin with. So, it wouldn't be strange if everything that happened on that day was already planned ever since the beginning. Let's try to imagine that Tsukishiro is the one who pushed Ichiro to the brink of death, and then waits for Tsubasa to find and save him. If you are asking how Tsukishiro could predict when Tsubasa would visit Ichiro, Tsubasa mentioned in Volume 3 that the day when he found Ichiro was February 14th, which is a Valentine's Day. Since they are man and woman, it's not hard to predict that Tsubasa will choose to visit him that day. If Tsukishiro could predict it, he could give Ichiro the final push on that specific day so Tsubasa will find him at the exact time. Tsubasa later called ambulance, but turned away by several hospital. It's not hard to think that Tsukishiro has enough authority to force a hospital to turn away a patient, and then he will appear as the hero who saved Ichiro. Tsukishiro needs to save Ichiro so Tsubasa will feel indebted to him, and that's how Tsukishiro could gain Tsubasa as his pawn in ANHS. This is just pure speculation, but that could explain how Tsukishiro was involved in bringing Tsubasa to ANHS. However, it's still unclear why Tsukishiro needs Tsubasa to observe Ayanokoji. According to Tsukishiro, Tsubasa is not special. She is capable, but doesn't have any special talent, and that is a perfect quality to make sure Ayanokoji wouldn't suspect her. If that is the case, then the theory about Tsubasa being a student from Kijima's secret facility is almost guaranteed wrong. She still has some secrets related to a new character named Mr. Shirogane, but if what she said about Ichiro is true, that means they used to attend a normal school, and were not raised in any special environment, which means they are just regular students. There is still a small chance that Tsubasa and Ichiro were part of the expelled students from the Kijima facility, but for now, let's just throw all the theories about Tsubasa to the grave. And now move to the next question, which is the real identity of Matsuo. To make everything clear, we need to figure out what exactly happened to the Butler Matsuo who takes care of Ayanokoji. According to Atsuomi, Atsuomi punished him by making Ichiro expelled from his school, so the Butler Matsuo ended up setting himself on fire to stop Atsuomi's rampage. However, if Ayanokoji's enrollment was already decided by Atsuomi, then what is the reason for Atsuomi to punish Matsuo? It's not impossible for Atsuomi to punish him with no reason, but there are two things that I found strange about Matsuo's story. First, Atsuomi never mentioned the name of Matsuo's son. And second, Tsubasa never mentioned Eiichiro's father's job, or how exactly he is tied to Ayanokoji. While it doesn't sound important, there is a line from Tsukishiro in the trial reading that makes me question how much of Atsuomi's story was actually true. He said that in order to deceive Ayanokoji, Tsubasa will need to mix the lie and the truth. At this point, Tsukishiro has not yet met Ayanokoji directly, so he must have gotten that advice from someone else, which is most likely from Atsuomi himself. If that is the case, then what Atsuomi told Ayanokoji in Volume 7 is either 100% truth, or there is some lie mixed in that story in order to deceive Ayanokoji. Since Tsubasa's monologue confirms the truth about Eiichiro, then the lie must be somewhere around the Butler Matsuo, and while this sounds crazy, maybe the one who took care of Ayanokoji before he enrolled at ANHS is not actually Eiichiro's father. According to Ayanokoji, Matsuo is a man in his 60s. He likes to talk about his son, and he eventually helped Ayanokoji to run away from his father. Just by this description, I don't think Atsuomi will hire someone who is emotional and unprofessional, so the theory about Atsuomi intentionally letting Ayanokoji enroll at ANHS by using Matsuo is most likely true. However, if the Butler Matsuo could deceive Ayanokoji, he must be someone who is really good at acting to deceive Ayanokoji. If we look back at Volume 3's second-year arc, Ayanokoji doesn't remember the name Eiichiro, so the Butler Matsuo most likely never told Ayanokoji the name of his son. If that is the case, it would be easy for Atsuomi to find someone else with the name Matsuo, and punish him to death so he could say that he punished Matsuo for his actions. Or, there is also a chance that the butler who takes care of Ayanokoji is just using the name Matsuo. Since Tsubasa never mentioned Eiichiro's father's name or job, it's possible that the butler who takes care of Ayanokoji is actually a different person, and the real Matsuo is the one who got punished by Atsuomi. The real Matsuo is probably the enemy of Atsuomi, so Atsuomi used the truth of his name to deceive Ayanokoji, and also used that story to get Tsubasa to his side. I know that sounds crazy, but this is all just speculation. We still didn't know who was the one who had a plan to invite Tsubasa, Tsukishiro or Atsuomi. Maybe Atsuomi only punished Matsuo and left Eiichiro alone, while Tsukishiro took advantage of the condition and pushed Eiichiro further so he could get Tsubasa on his side. This could explain why Tsubasa didn't know about Ishigami, which means Tsukishiro really tried to play both sides by using Tsubasa. However, once again, this is all just speculation. Maybe we will get the full answer in this volume, so instead of making a lot of theories that will end up wrong, let's just wait and see, and let's hope this volume could bring this series back to its peak.